Hello, this webinar is titled Resistance to Tyrants is Obedience to God. Jonathan Mayhew, the Forgotten Prophet, his background and character. And this is another layer of looking at this 20-something's life and how profound it was. Well, I want to put this picture up here of the Pilgrims departing in 1620 for the American continent to establish the Plymouth colony. And this was said about them. They cherished a great hope and inward zeal of laying good foundations, or at least of making some way towards it, for the propagation and advance of the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in the remote parts of the world, even though they should be but stepping stones to others in the performance of so great a work. And Jonathan Mayhew, in fact, was the beneficiary of these stepping stones. As we've looked at already, the Reformation took place with Martin Luther in Germany and John Calvin in France and Switzerland and John Knox in Scotland in the 1500s. That's what started it all. And during this time period, biblical truth was rediscovered that God dispenses His authority into four institutions: individual, family, church, and civil government, each with unique responsibilities and defined for each of the entities. And so Jonathan Mayhew and the Mayhew family actually came in 1630, just 10 years after the Pilgrims landed, with these new sets of biblical thoughts. Exactly 90 years later, and 100 years after the Pilgrims' arrival, Jonathan Mayhew was born in 1720 on Martha's Vineyard, and his father was a minister. Well, Jonathan Mayhew had ideas of liberty that were formed in his youth. He said this: "Having been initiated in youth in the doctrines of civil liberty as they were taught by such men as Plato, Cicero, and other renowned persons among the ancients, and such as Sidney and Milton and Locke and Hoadley among the moderns, I liked them. They seemed rational. And having learnt from the Holy Scriptures that wise, brave, and virtuous men were always friends to liberty, that God gave the Israelites a king in His anger because they had not sense and virtue enough to like a free commonwealth, and that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, this made me conclude that freedom was a great blessing." He continued his education at Harvard in 1740 and graduated in 1744 at the age of 24. On June 17th in 1747, he was ordained pastor of the West Church in Boston at age 26. His commissioning came from the lips of his father, Reverend Experience Mayhew, who is a distinguished missionary to the Native Americans. His character and legacy. He is beloved for his pastoral fidelity and generous deeds, distinguished for his genius and his intellectual strength, eminent in both New England and Old England as a scholar and divine, revered as a true lover of liberty, and ardent Christian patriot. He preached this sermon when he was just 29 years old on January 30th, 1750, 26 years before the Declaration of Independence was even written. Yet a full 26 years after this sermon was preached, it was still being talked about and printed and read in 1776. Sam Adams said this: "A sermon in 1750 on the 30th of January, it was read by everybody, celebrated by friends, and abused by enemies. Mayhew seemed to be raised up to revive all the animosities against tyranny in church and state. To draw the character of Mayhew would be to transcribe a dozen volumes. This transcendent genius threw all the weight of his great fame onto the scale of his country in 1761 and maintained it there with zeal and ardor till his death in 1766. Mayhew even conceived of the committees of correspondence to James Otis. It was the internet of that time period on how the colonies were to communicate with one another. And he said this on a Sunday morning, the Lord's Day morning, June 8th, 1766. "Sir, to a good man all time is holy enough, and none is too holy to do good or to think upon it. Cultivating a good understanding and hearty friendship between these colonies appears to me so necessary a part of prudence and good policy, perhaps the only means of perpetuating their liberties. While I was thinking of this in my bed, the great use and importance of a communion of colonies appeared to me in a strong light, which led me immediately to set down these hints to transmit to you. He would die 30 days later, July 9th, 1766, at the young age of 45, a full 10 years before the Declaration was declared. John Quincy Adams, the sixth U.S. president, was even still reflecting on this man's work. He was a clergyman equaled by very few of any denomination in piety, virtue, genius, or learning, whose works will maintain his character as long as New England shall be free, integrity esteemed, or wit, spirit, humor, reason, and knowledge admired. Jonathan Mayhew, the Forgotten Prophet, his background and character. My name's Craig Seibert. Thanks for listening.